has these recommendations about allowable solutions, which are an important part of the top segment of the triangle, aren't they? And and as part and parcel of that, we know, and I think you touched on it earlier, that the delivery side of that is the different community energy funding or private sector funding routes. That is of some interest to a major developer in particular, in the sense that by meeting the allowable solutions part of an obligation, you can make payments which then discharge your obligation. But in order to make those payments, you need very quickly soon the administrative framework for a funding institution to be set up with a list of projects that are developable and a community energy fund that the developer can pay into. And in a sense, that's more important than waiting to develop the policy. Some practical,
isn't it? It is someone being prepared to stand there and say, we are going to deliver this, and that goes from central government needs to actually do something and say we are going to, and counties, districts, this is what you're going to have to do. It's not very popular, but we're going to have to make some big decisions here, because at the moment everyone's going, well, I don't really want it if it's going to affect any votes for me, so we'll just kind of ignore that massive part of wind because it's a little bit controversial. And whilst that's going on, the rest of it doesn't feel that credible, and that's the problem. It's mired in the normal planning and politics and all this stuff. And so without strong policy, the rest of it feels quite weak. I think one of the other difficulties cost-wise is that this is fine, but the reality is with SIL 106, community energy funds, there's only so much money available, and there's less money available generally at the moment than there has been for a long time, and there becomes a point at which you're not driving things forward, you're grinding things to a halt, and that's the balance, and that's really difficult. There's not an easy answer on that.
Renewable heat incentive is designed to give a 12% return on the marginal investment in renewable heat, because it's got to try and drive a margin. So in theory that's viable. You have to look at the numbers of the specific projects, but that's a new opportunity which actually could help you potentially with some of your meeting some of your building rates commitments, depending on the consistency between the code and those mechanisms. The new banding around the renewables obligation, which supports all the larger technologies, has just come out, and that's generally very positive still. So a lot of those mechanisms will make these projects viable and don't necessarily place an extra burden on you.
District-wide solutions have worked for us have been on very dense urban schemes, and on low-rise new community type schemes it's not viable because the upfront capital investment required just doesn't pay back at all. You're better going unit by unit on solutions for those, and that's the problem at the moment, is the maths doesn't add up to make it work for making those sort of bigger investments, because we don't have the money to make those investments. I don't think the rest of the industry has that money available to make those investments that pay back over 20 odd years.
Let's try and understand. I'm just trying to understand in the first issue what private sector means, because it could mean one of two things. There might be more. That private sector in that sense could mean major utility providers being involved with promoting major renewable energy infrastructure projects. And I just wondered to what extent, taking it in that sense, you've liaised with, or you're going to liaise with, utility providers. I mean, at the moment on Northstowe, no names, no pack drill, but we've got an energy consultant on board. We've also got a utility provider acting as a consultant on board to give us an indication of what might be viable. And in terms of that particular question, what investment conditions, they're going to, whether it be FITs or renewable heat incentives or level of funding available, level of return, that's the right direction to pose that question to, because I suspect that those of us sitting around here that are in the development business can't answer those questions. If the private sector means from a development point of view, particularly a major development point of view, when would we invest? I mean, to some extent, that my response to that is related to my earlier questions, which is trying to understand the on and off side solutions, the fabric efficiency part of that triangle of compliance, and then the renewables, next level, and then the allowable solutions level, particularly in terms of investment. If you consider investment meaning financial contributions to the idea of a community or private energy fund, then that's a form of investment. And to some extent, I suppose part of the answer to that question is having the certainty of being able to comply with planning policy or other regulatory requirements, by which I mean principally building regulations.
Yeah.
That you're proposing an energy strategy that complies with all of that, and that you're in the funding that you're making available, you've got the most cost-effective means of bringing that funding forward, of which at the moment there are a number of sources to look at. Probably the most recent one is the CLG report on optimum renewable provision for energy initiatives, where optimum levels of mix and match of fabric and different sorts of things are presented in that report. It's quite an authoritative report. So there are a number of source documents that answer that question, but there's also an indication of trying to separate the different private sector elements, posing that question in a different sense.
So to summarise understanding, so there's a piece around the incentives for the renewable energy business, the ESCO or whatever, utility company. There's another thing around the degree to which that helps you to meet a firm planning policy or building regs commitment.
Yeah.
I suppose the missing piece, which we always tend to find, is that relationship between the ESCO and you as a building promoter, which is always going to come down to build out rates and certainty of market and all of that. Is there anything that can be done around that to make everybody?
Is there something that can be done around that? That ESCO, that infrastructure provider, effectively. There are the energy utilities, but also I'm just thinking to bring it in right back into the political area with TIFs, the tax increment financing, in engaging in that way. And I don't know how. I can't recall how that's been catered for, Cheryl, in the Community Energy Fund.
Work that's going on with the Community Energy Fund was to, first of all, look at governance. It was to look at how you could be looking at the carbon accounting of a fund. It was looking at how you could then use this fund, which with developers coming in wanting certainty that they can offset their obligation, but also how you could then potentially use that fund to leverage other monies or match into other monies. That's being looked at. But the most important thing was also trying to get a view on how, with that fund, you need to be clear to developers what you're going to invest in, what infrastructure locally you're going to invest in. And so what we're going to get out of this, hopefully, is some schemes that we think will be good for our Community Energy Fund to invest in, so that it's clear for the developers that where their money is going to go.
Would tax
We might even have
financing
tax on the Community Energy Fund, how your public assets can be looked at to be able to create a revenue stream to support the Community Energy Fund. So,
if I remember correctly, even your carbon compliance, which is the on-site bit, can include connections to district heating networks as well. So, what do you need in order to be able to capture that opportunity as well?
It all comes down to certainty at the moment, as much as that's a big thing, isn't it? Isn't for now, whilst all this going on in the background, whilst there's uncertainty about policy from the top down and timing of delivery, we've just got to row our own boat, really, because we can't afford to not meet building regs and not meet code requirements because of the implications of that.
Yeah.
And so you've got to end up doing your own thing at the moment, and that's a problem, and that's going to carry on until there is that leadership to hopefully give some direction.
I agree with Andrew. It needs an iron sort of fist through it of strong leadership. The type of Manchester, what's his name, Bernstein or London Mirror type drive to say this is what's going to happen, unpopular as it may be, because otherwise it's just everything's moving from the development.
My impression is that's not going to come from central government, because that's not the policy of this government. It can come from the local level.
I'm thinking regionally,
but certainly, but then the regional structure's been taken away as well. But certainly at the local level, there is that's, I think, partly what CRIF is about. But
Yes.
I think, if anything, the message of this week is you're not going to get that support or leadership from central government, because I think the view of this government is that should come from the local level.
Yeah.
But all the more reason to get councillors on board and make this happen. But I think there's also a key role for the community. For example, looking at things in a different way. So looking at smaller energy providers, looking at the community being involved in the management of that in a new development, opportunities for community trust, for governance, rather than just going to the...
But most of the reality is most house buyers aren't interested in the slightest in delivery of energy. They just want to be able to choose the cheapest provider they can choose, whether that's a green provider or not. They don't want to get involved, and there's all the concerns as to who funds, if there's funding gaps, and where that sits in the ownership of those companies. It's a huge problem. It's very difficult to deal with open space and things, and management companies for blocks of flats, let alone going into power and renewables. And that's one of the difficulties, is that actually there's not an appetite, and there's certainly not a premium from home buyers for that. If anything, they'll be the opposite.
And also
Yes,
lawyers
yes.
as well. I mean, if you're buying a house and you've got a conveyancer lawyer, certain issues just cause a problem. Curbstones can cause a problem when trying to sell a house. You get a lawyer involved trying to look through what is the legality, what's your responsibility, how do you get your power, mortgage companies, valuers, it's all, it's got to be very clear.
I suppose that's why I think it's really interesting on the existing communities that bring in something and work out how that scheme works. And I think that's going to influence, let's say, new homes and where you're going to
Final point for me, again, something that relates to question 2. I think it's absolutely vital. A lot of work does centre around the sources of funding in order to take infrastructure projects forward. And we skated through all of those. This is another one I thought of, which is the County Council initiative at the moment, the local authority initiative on the local asset-based vehicles.
Yes.
It's looking at the moment, which is looking, I think you mentioned earlier, Sharon, it's looking at existing assets and seeing how those might be recycled or used in terms of the basis for borrowings, collateral for borrowings. And we talk about the new homes bonus and SIL and all the other subsidies. It's really important to, in an area of growth, to look at those to see what opportunities there is to have a conduit through which that funding can achieve things. Because otherwise you fall back on, those of us in the major development industry, you fall back on making policy or regulatory requirements that layer on additional costs to major developments which are seriously challenged anyway. And all that tends to happen is that it makes those schemes unviable, and you can have as many policies as you like encouraging growth to go forward in the present government's agenda, but it doesn't happen because it doesn't work on the ground, because the only source of finance relied on is this layered finance on top of all the other infrastructure.